This is the Seers See podcast, where we explore the seer gift within the Kingdom of God mindset.
So, hi, Emily.
Hey, Doug.
We were just talking about how far do we think we can get in this chapter. It's chapter 8, which, not saying I'm prophetic, but prophetic people read symbolism where there aren't symbols. But
Yeah.
I'm still going to read the symbol here in chapter 8, the number 8. Biblical model for interpreting what seers see.
Okay, so now I'm curious because I've heard a couple of different ideas of what 8 is. So what's 8?
Well, 7 is God's completeness. 8 is above and beyond, basically.
Okay.
So if 7 is the perfection, and God is actually above that.
Okay, so one of the...
Like it's infinite. Even the number 8 in English, wherever that derives from, is like an infinite symbol if you think about it.
Right. Yeah, because I'd actually, one of the interpretations I've seen is that it's Jesus' number. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. So,
I'm good with that. Yep.
Because it's so, I mean, not to get totally sidetracked, but you look this up, everybody has a different reason for why they say this is the number, what this number means. And this is the reason why getting caught in gematria can really take you down some windy, twisty roads. So, I don't get too hung up on numbers, but
abstract. When people who think abstractly and they see abstractions and they see God's messages and abstract concepts, because after all, ideas are abstractions, and we use something called words to try to make them concrete. It's so easy to overinterpret. Well, yes. According to the Bible, the number 8. No, just stop. I mean, so that's why I'm vague. Like the 7 is God's completeness. 8 is above that. Whatever that means. Yeah, whatever that means. Yeah.
I love it. Oh.
Yeah. So biblical model. So I titled this A Biblical Model. It's not the biblical model. It's it's a model for interpreting what seers see.
Yeah, because I don't think there is one. I think this is why we have to be so wholly dependent on the Holy Spirit. I mean, we in our fleshliness can justify and twist anything to fit our model. This is a reason why I'm not a huge fan of systematics. Mm-hmm. I really don't like even systematic theology. Don't get me wrong. There's places it's handy, it's helpful. But what I do is considered narrative theology. So I love the fact that in this, you open it up with how important the story is. It's such a crucial part of how God communicates with us is what is the story, to the point, and this is one of my favorite teachings, the rabbis would not enact or enforce a law unless they had 2 stories illustrating on how it was supposed to be enforced. So, wow. Yeah, I mean, that's huge.
It's wisdom.
Yeah. When God shows you how to do it, then you can act out. So for me, the story is, man, that is where it's at. Because I think we get too caught up. I don't want to bash anyone who absolutely loves Paul's letters. They're great. They're fantastic. That's not the end all and be all. You've got to go back to the stories he's referring to. You're
absolutely.
Not that. So
because he's commentating on the story.
Yeah.
And I mean, if Jesus is the fulfillment of Israel's story,
mm-hmm.
which is why the Gospels aren't only about Jesus dealing with sin. If so, it would start with the crucifixion.
Right. I hadn't thought of it from that perspective, but yeah.
I mean, it's mostly, and some scholars have called the Gospels extended passion narratives. No, they're not extended passion narratives. All right. So there is a narrative, and like, so why? What's the point? And so like the point is, well, read the narrative. Yeah. It's about God becoming king. It's about Jesus becoming king. So it's about the kingdom. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I'm jumping way ahead in the biblical model for interpreting what Seers See. But I mean, that's what the story of the Bible is about. It's about establishing his kingdom on earth as it is in heaven.
Right. Well, and the story gives you the proper framework to view the little discrete packets of teachings of the do's and do nots. And without that framework, you can get to some really bad conclusions.
Yeah.
Because, a real easy example of this is polygamy. The Bible has so many stories about polygamy, and I have seen, oh my goodness, it's a huge movement. I began thinking about this, and it's funny how God works. I was thinking about this, like I didn't talk to anyone about it. I didn't Google anything, but when I got on Facebook this morning, there was like 20 different reels with people talking about the pros and cons of polygamy and how the Bible does or does not support it. You can make that case both ways if you use a systematic. But in the narrative, you learn, oh, this is a bad idea. You cannot read any story about a polygamous marriage that turns out well. So
how would you describe systematic theology versus a narrative theology?
Systematic, a lot of times that's where they are taking a particular topic, a particular subject, and they're pulling all of those verses about that topic, and they're trying to create some kind of order or systematic to filter them through and figure out application. And the problem with that is when they take those verses, those individual verses, if you don't have the full context behind what they mean, you can twist them. And, don't get me wrong, I'm not knocking all systematic theologies. I'm not saying they aren't helpful. But if it's a tool to be used in addition to the narrative. It's not something to divorce from the narrative. And I think for too long, and especially in our society, where it's so easy to pull a verse out and put it on a Facebook meme, a coffee cup, a T-shirt, or bumper sticker, and say, "Oh, here's what I believe." Out, and the people around you are missing out. And
it's the story. I mean, so Paul, you mentioned Paul. So many people want to interpret Genesis through Paul, through the Paul lens, Genesis 1 through 3, without getting into too much of a rabbit trail. But Paul is interpreting Jesus and using the narrative starting with Adam through the history of Israel to interpret Jesus. So so that's systematic theologians will start with a particular verse, say, I don't know, Romans 5:12, and then use that to interpret everything. And whereas that's not Paul's point. And it's like when people say to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Therefore,
there's no such thing as ghost.
Yeah, like whoa, wait a minute. Was Paul talking about that? Like, first, hold on. And so, to be honest, yes, there's value in systematic theology, but so often people have the conclusion in mind first, and they go and they find the verses to justify it.
Yeah, it's called eisegesis, and the first thing you're taught in seminary is you don't do eisegesis, you do exegesis. And
I mean, I was listening to, in our church, we're following, we have adult Sunday school, and we're following a booklet, and just going through passages of booklet, and the author is trying to make a point, and the point is probably accurate, but he pulls verses wildly out of context. I said it to the class, this verse to justify it. Yeah, the conclusion is correct, but this verse is wildly out of context. This is not how you defend a point. This is terrible. Christians, I don't know why we do this. When we take one line out of a story, and then so I don't know. Systematic theology. That's why, and N.T. Wright really. I was listening to one of his books, and I had to listen to it like 3 or 4 times. I mean, honest, like 3 or 4 times, because I was just like needing to get it. Yeah, and he said something about when the gospel writers wanted to tell us about God theology, they didn't give us systematic theology; they gave us a story.
Right. Well, and people remember stories. That's the other thing.
Yeah. They remember stories like movies. I mean, Brian Godawa, who is a screenwriter and author, has like classes about biblical storytelling, and he says, like, man, if you would, I mean, some of the books of the Bible are graphic, like you couldn't make them into movies. They're so violent and graphic, But the
Oh, yeah.
authors are painting pictures very purposely
hmm
because they
and
want they want an emotional response, right?
exactly. Exactly. And especially when you get into the prophetic writings, I mean, they are really trying to use that graphic shock, that horror. They want to jar you out of complacency. They want to force you into a place of emotional limbo and uncomfortableness to look at stuff from another perspective. How do you do that? You empathize with the person in the story.
Yeah.
And you don't get that with thou shalt not kill. Well, let's tell a story about killing. Let's tell a story about what happens when life is cut short. Let's tell a story what happens when you are the one who cuts life short. And now you have a basis for this emotional reaction because God is so relational. And when you're in relationship with someone, you don't give them a list of rules. You give them a reason to respect the relationship.
Yeah.
And that
yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, I've come to understand through the teachings of Carmen Imes the value more about the law, because I used to interpret the law through Paul. But I started with Paul, and the law is bad. The law is Hagar. The law is all these terrible things. And that's not Paul's point, I don't think. So like Carmen Imes is an Old Testament scholar, and really, she really helped me understand, like, oh my gosh, the law is a beautiful thing.
Oh yeah.
It's a beautiful thing, but particularly in context, but even now, because, and I get into a little bit of it in the chapter, and that's where the story of Israel is so instructive, as opposed to starting with, I don't know, say Romans 7, like, don't start with Romans 7, start with Genesis 1, and then get the Old Testament in you, and then Paul makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, because that's how the people who first received the New Testament got it. They had the Old Testament in them, and then they get the New Testament. And this is one of the reasons why when I'm studying anything in the Old Testament, I usually start with Jewish sources. I start with even Jewish sources who are writing today, because they aren't looking at it through that Christian lens, which, that's not saying I don't, but I start there so I can get that perspective, so I can try to get back in line with what was the original intent of the author. Who was he speaking to? The New Testament was jarring new revelation, and we are so immune to it because we think, oh, well, this is just kindness, love, goodness. These are all great things. And we think that somehow
it's shocking.
Yeah.
I mean, 2/3 of Luke, for instance, is not about the cross.
Right.
And each story builds and builds and builds, and it's about, I mean, so like, it's the story, the narrative. There's so much power in that, and starting in the Old Testament too, to get context for what Luke is talking about, is super helpful.
Absolutely, and and that's where my area of study mostly is Old Testament at night, because I did that because of the stories.
Last week, I think I told you this on my phone, but I'm just going to get it on tape. Last week, my daughter, after church, because I teach each week, and she, on the way home from church, and it's a small church I teach at, small country church, a lot of mainly older people, older than me, and they mostly heard the scriptures a lot. But I enjoy bringing sort of this new perspective. I don't want to call it new perspective, an old perspective, a non-traditional perspective. But anyway, so Zoe, she's 12. On the way home, she said, sometimes I wish you'd go longer, like preach longer, so you go deeper. But I get why you don't. Old people don't have long attention spans. She's 12.
I love her the way.
And we hear so many times, young people, they don't like sermons, they don't like, but sure, when I was in youth ministry, I tried to keep the message to 20 minutes, but because you want to leave wanting more. And the story of the Bible is so relevant, so powerful. These teens would come back every week, want more. And it wasn't because I was funny and I didn't have gimmicks. I just taught, because one day, and this chapter, by the way, is based on my youth curriculum. So I embellish a little bit in the chapter. I expand in the chapter, but it's based on a 7-part series. You can find it on my website. If you go to seersee.com and you just search for youth curriculum, It's called God's story, finding your place in God's supernatural plan. And I taught it. I practiced it on 2 different church youth groups over a period of years and fashioned it down to 7s. And I got to the point, Emily, where the kids could teach it. They were so excited. I could go over and over because it was so relevant to their lives.
But it's such a great story. And that's the thing. We do that when the story's really good. We all know the story of Cinderella inside and out. Why? Because it's a great story. We all know Beauty and the Beast in 20 different versions. If you live long enough, it's there. They're good stories. Now, with this, the best story we've ever heard, we can go there. And I think a lot of times pastors are really afraid to go that deep, and oh man, they just aren't going to hang with it. I guarantee you, if you're giving this stuff and putting it out there, they get it. And don't give me that, oh, well, there's a young or a fairly immature congregation, they need milk. Okay. I'm not a great hostess. I'm the kind of person that tells you to find what you need in the refrigerator. That's the way I am. But I also know I need to have a variety. I need to have milk, but I also need to have cereal to go with it. I need steak. I need, I need to be able to
yes.
banquet.
Jesus gave the parable of the sower,
Mhm.
and then to the people who weren't in a relationship with him, and then to his people, he explained what it meant. Tell the story, then explain it. Don't be afraid. Did everybody get it? Did all the disciples get it? Oh, Judas didn't. But did every disciple get it? Doesn't matter, man.
Right.
I taught the first section is on Leviathan, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But I taught on Leviathan to my youth group. Okay, Leviathan, the chaos monster, and a young person, 13-year-old, never paid attention. A boy, 13-year-old boy, mind was all over the place, just squirrely, just typical young boy who just drove me crazy as a youth leader. Taught on Leviathan. He was locked in, man. He was locked in.
Now, this is teenage boy paradise right there.
He went home and he got his dad was the pastor, the campus pastor. His dad called me and said, "Oh, my son came home and he was super excited about youth group and your message. He got his Bible and started looking up every reference he could to Leviathan." I said, "Oh, that's cool." He said, "Yeah, but he got some of the concepts wrong. Doug, is it wise to teach deep theological concepts to these teens?" And I said, "When's the last time he came home and opened up his Bible?"
Yeah.
I said, "It took me 35 years before I heard about Leviathan, and probably and remotely got it close. I still don't have it close. I don't have it. These are concepts.
Yeah.
But they're helpful."
And you know what? When you can capture someone's imagination, now all of a sudden they're going to pursue it. And to say we're capturing the imagination doesn't mean we're offering a fiction. We've just grabbed the imagination, and that's one of the end roots. This is one reason we got to be careful about what we're thinking about. And this is why we need to be filling our heads with all of this great Bible goodness and digging in and finding those nuggets. Because if our imagination is engrossed in that, we aren't going to be engrossed in other things that we shouldn't be imagining. So, yeah.
Amen. Word.
Well, so tell us about Leviathan, what it is.
So this is the biblical model for interpreting what seers see. It's all about, we've gone through several chapters, and to me, this is like the most fun chapter. I went through the history. I like history. I went through our worst seers in the Bible. That's fun. But how can seers understand what it is they're seeing? And so hopefully this gives you a framework. And so I just tell the story of the Bible, but I start before Genesis. Like, what was before Genesis 1? And so there are other creation accounts in the Bible besides Genesis 1. And one of them, a couple of them are in the Psalms, a couple of them are, one of them's in Job. And he talks about Leviathan, that God slew Leviathan or tamed Leviathan. And then after he slew Leviathan, then he started creating. And I think Psalm 74 is a great one, and I think Psalm 104 are both examples. So what is Leviathan? Leviathan is, scholars will say, Leviathan is a construct of chaos. a construct, like a mental construct. It's a multi-head. It's not a dinosaur. The scriptures even say it's a multi-headed sea monster. And so in ancient world, they would look at the sea. Humans couldn't walk on the water. They couldn't tame the storms. They couldn't live in it. It was scary. Storms came out of the sea, and it was dangerous to sail on it sometimes. And sometimes they would fish and they'd get stuff. Sometimes they fish and they wouldn't. It was just untamable. And so it became a construct of chaos in general, because it was a terrible. You never knew if a famine would wipe out your crops. You never knew if the neighboring tribe would come and invade. You never knew that giants over the hill would come and invade. I mean, you never knew if someone would get sick and the whole village would get wiped out. You never knew if the king would just suddenly take all the young virgins. I mean, it was chaos, man, and
It was
scary. And not everything's a demon. And so, like, they had this concept to help them think about chaos, and it's Leviathan. Mm-hmm. And it's not just in Israel. All the ancient cultures in that part of the world, probably around the world even, had similar concepts. And we do the same thing whenever we name a hurricane. Mm-hmm. A hurricane comes. What do? We give it a name. Why do we give it a name? It helps us understand. Us understand.
It kind of gives us that little handle to grab hold of. That's kind of how I look at it. It's not the totality of what's being discussed, but something you can tag it, you can hold on to it. It's the thing that allows you to interact without being overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. So, and
go ahead.
I love that you went to Psalm 74, because that's a psalm of Asaph. And in Second Chronicles 29:30, he's identified as a seer. He's the grandson of Samuel, who was also a seer and a prophet. So here we have this bloodline, which we can talk about that later, but a bloodline of seers and his family. So it makes sense to me that absolutely he's going to understand the concept of Leviathan. So, but you're saying it's go ahead.
I mean, yes, these are concepts that people had in the ancient world, according to scholars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Go ahead.
I was going to say, one of the big stories in the ancient world was Marduk kills Tiamat and then divides her body and scatters it around to make the earth. And what's interesting is, in the biblical account, God never uses Leviathan's body to make creation. He may overcome it, he tames it, he controls it, but he does not use it as a means for creation. So
why is that important? Because that is hugely important compared to Marduk, who created out of a dead deity, Tiamat, or dead Leviathan, and similar stories. Every other pagan story has something like that. So why? Why does that matter?
Man, is to show you God's power. He's better than, he's greater than. He does not need this helpful aid of a decomposing body. He created something that was good, not rotting carcass. And so when you realize the distinction.
Distinction, absolutely. Creation is not divine. It's not part of a divine creature that was slain by a more powerful deity.
Yeah. And I think that's something that we have to be very careful with as seers to be sure to make that distinction, because what we see, it can sound like we're talking about creation as being divine. And that's not.
Yeah, we're not saying that. So Leviathan, Tiamat, I think, was a serpent, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And isn't so, like, the earliest creation accounts in the Bible and the Psalms and Job talk about Leviathan being slain or tamed or whatever. But in Genesis 1, we don't see that. What does the author do in Genesis 1? I don't know if you're prepared for this. I didn't prepare for this, but let's just go there.
I do love it, because God just really thumbs his nose at every, and that's being tamed, because I really think that the hand gesture is a little more aggressive, at all the other gods who are out there. I mean, he absolutely refuses to name Leviathan. Yes, there is chaos. Yes, there's void. There's deep. But instead of being in conflict, he broods over the face of the water. And that word there, the only other time we have it in scripture is when it's talking about one of the birds, I think it's a flamingo, nesting, brooding over her eggs. So it's this idea of nurturing and loving and still bringing something good out of chaos, not in conflict, but the chaos gives up in obedience. And I love that. That's fabulous. And when you go on further in the story, the great light and the small light or lesser light, God's not even going to name the sun and the moon because those are also names of deities and surrounding cultures. And God's like, I'm not even going to say your name because you don't deserve a place in my story. And so I adore that. And when I realized that, the geek in me got happy.
Yeah, and I think sea creatures, he mentions, the sea is teeming with creatures. And I think he even uses a word derived from Tiamat, I think.
The Tananim, I believe, might be.
Yeah.
And
so again, it's like some people say it's demytholizing it. It's like the earlier concepts, the earlier creation stories, they served a purpose. But whoever wrote Genesis 1 was like, I'm taking all the conflict out, because really it wasn't conflict.
Right.
I mean, it really was. Yeah, there was the chaos. I love that he brooded over it. Then he began to separate this from that, this from that, this and that. And
Psalms 104, where another Leviathan reference specifically says God made Leviathan. So he is the creator. And that's okay because he's still greater than.
Right.
And so
he made the chaotic system, and then he tamed it. And by taming it makes the world safe for us to live in.
I love the imagery in Job when God says that he's going to basically make Leviathan be a pet, and it's going to be so tame that the maids can lead him around on a leash.
He has a leash. Yeah, he has a leash.
And the other gods can't do that because, just from, life lesson example, my dad broke horses. My daughter breaks horses. I grew up, I got to help with that. It's a lot easier to kill a horse than to tame a horse. I mean, you can shoot one dead in a heartbeat. Not that I've ever done it, but I know that it has been done. Mm-hmm. Taming a horse, particularly a wild one, that's life-threatening if you aren't careful. So just the people of this culture would have gotten this. Why? Because they knew horses, they knew camels, they knew large livestock, they knew the cost of trying to tame a wild beast. And so they wouldn't have had to have someone say, oh, wait a minute, that's impressive. They would have already known. So sometimes
it is such a profound statement of God's sovereignty and power it's awesome. So in the beginning was Leviathan, a chaos monster. I think in Job also there's a concept of Behemoth, which is the chaos monster of the land, the beast, if you will. And so, like, Job sees a creature, and it represents chaos in the land. So who can tame that? Because, so like there's, again, ancient world, it's thousands of years old, right? Over thousands of years, there's lots of different concepts. Who can tame the chaos on the land when tornadoes come or famine comes and it doesn't have to be weather or nature. Right. It could just represent like invading armies. I mean, or it could just in our own lives represent like a financial crisis or health crises or.
You ever say, how chaotic would viruses seem to them back then?
Oh, yeah.
That's insane. Why did some wounds heal cleanly, leaving little scars? Why did some of them fester to the point they had to do amputation? They didn't know. This would have all looked chaotic to them. And so you had to think they felt like they were at the mercy of chaos. Even with understanding those kinds of processes in my own life, there's days I'm like, I don't think it can get more chaotic. And it's not necessarily, like you said, it's not always this natural disaster. It's just the randomness of life, the way things occur. And
it could be your tire getting a flat. I give an example in the book of, it could be someone digging in the yard and accidentally hitting the gas line, and that really ruins your day. Sometimes I'll hear a siren going off on a Monday morning. That someone's life just that ruined their day. It's chaos, right? That's
one wrong call.
Yeah, I mean, it could be big things like you mentioned, the viruses. I mean, shoot, we understand viruses, and we still had a whole world in chaos
Yeah,
for months on end, and then
really.
the pent up frustration released chaos in cities, and then there's chaos in war. I mean, so Behemoth, Leviathan, and what did you think about my theory? I don't want to call it a theory. I just suggest that yes, these are constructs in the ancient world to help them think about things, but maybe a seer saw it
Hmm.
and saw the manifestation of chaos in the spirit realm, and it looked like a multi-headed sea dragon, or it looked like a multi-headed land monster.
I actually have on my notes that I really like the part where you talk about maybe Leviathan isn't a demonic power.
Mm,
Maybe it is something different. And and I love the idea of it being part of creation. And because I see that when I look at creation, and the illustration that I got is, we talk all the time about the potter and the clay when we talk in biblical circles. Okay, but when the potter's making the pot, first of all, his fingerprints are there. Second of all, his DNA is in there. That there's something left behind from his interaction with this created thing. And when it's baked in. You
mm.
cannot separate the potter's DNA from the creation. And so a lot of times when I'm seeing like some kind of spiritual force behind things, you and I've had extensive conversations about trees and things like that. I see a lot of this as that, for a lack of a better word, that spiritual residue, that spiritual DNA that's left behind. It's not that it is God, but it's some kind of essence, or just remnant of God's power in creation. And so there's still a distinction. I'm not saying that any of this is
Mhm.
divine, but I think that the spiritual forces are, yeah, they aren't necessarily demonic. They aren't necessarily evil. They're just, we live in a physical world that was created by this almighty spiritual being. And so
That's awesome. That's an awesome extrapolation of the concept.
I,
Because
and
we've struggled with what are nature spirits.
Mhm.
I've struggled with it. What are nature spirits? Are they the powers, principalities? And we'll get that later. Are they demons? It doesn't make sense. None of that made sense
Mhm.
based on eyewitness accounts. So I turned to scripture.
Mhm.
Where can I find nature spirits? They sometimes seem to have volition. Sometimes they just seem to be instinctual.
Yeah, but
Um,
culture has them.
every culture has them.
Everyone's got stories about them. And so it's like, what's going on here? And yeah, and I could definitely see Leviathan kind of fitting into this spiritual, I don't want to say life force or what have you, just yeah.
Trying to stay away from We're trying to stay away from like pagan concepts and monism, or all is divine, because that is distinctly pagan. That is what Marduk and Tiamat, like, it's not all divine, but there are divine elements, or I should say, and there are spiritual things going on in nature, and seers see them.
Yeah, because the spiritual realm and the physical realm are not separate.
Right.
They exist within each other. And it's one big tangled mess. And that's chaotic. But it
It is
also
chaotic. Yeah. And we're supposed to bring order. We're supposed to tame it as
Mhm.
partnering with the Lord. It doesn't mean cutting down all the trees and putting shopping malls up, but it does mean maybe making gardens, turn graves into gardens, that song, it is beautifying things. It is taming things. I don't think we're supposed to, like, making nature preserves and taking out some of the dead brush and
Controlled burn.
so yeah, 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 and not letting it, like, burns go out of control. Yeah, we're supposed to partner with the Lord and molding the creation. But I do think so I talk about, what do you think about the bit about Bigfoot and Thunderbird?
And I read that, and now I'm trying to remember what I read because I didn't make any notes on it specifically.
Mhm.
I have found out, just kind of side note, where we moved in Oklahoma is actually supposed to be one of the areas where Bigfoot has been spotted the most, like on
Wow.
our particular part of Oklahoma. Um, and I've questioned this before. How did this fit in? And I have a cousin who this is what he does. He hunts for Bigfoot. He hunts for all these wonderful cryptids. And I'm open.
Mhm.
Maybe there's something, or maybe it is a seer seeing something. I've heard a lot of stories of people who have had crazy experiences that I don't know how to explain. I was speaking within the last month to a guy who swears up and down when he was 12 years old that they were hunting and Bigfoot stepped over him. And so, yeah. So I,
There's so many sightings. I'm not an expert by any measure of. I'm not an expert. I struggle to believe in Bigfoot, to be honest. I was on the Paranormal podcast and we did an episode on Bigfoot, and I was shocked. I was the only one who didn't believe. Like everyone else was like bought in. I'm like, oh my gosh, maybe I missed a boat on that one. Well, my speculation is maybe some visions of Bigfoot are like nature manifestations.
well, and okay, so I do know personal experience, and so again, not Bible. I know just there are
Remember, personal experience impacts theology.
right.
This is what I'm trying to find a model to make sense of it. It doesn't answer every little thing, but if you can put a model to it, it can help.
True. But I kind of always feel like there's this obligation to say I can't back this up with the Bible. So I want to
Yeah.
make sure that everybody
Yep.
knows. And so there are places, um, like the edge of a river, the edge of the woods, the place where one thing meets with another, doorways, the corners of rooms, hallways, where manifestations seem to be more common, that they seem to be easier to see. It's funny to me a lot of times when I'll talk to seers and we'll be having a conversation like in this one room, and I will ask them, is it in the doorway or corner? And they will go, it's in the corner. It's always in the corner. How did you know that? Or it's in the hallway. It's always because there's something about those places of transition where you're literally physically making a transition. It kind of mimics something in that spiritual transition or crossing over where you can see. At least that's my theory. But also there's times. There's dawn and dusk. Those times where we're making a transition. When do people say they see Bigfoot? They see these things roaming around in the forest. It's usually the edge of the woods at dusk, the edge of the woods at dawn, on the river at these times. And
That's neat. That's a neat concept. I hadn't thought of that. That's awesome.
it's and I've talked to several people, and it's almost always the same. And so that's kind of why I'm like, maybe those people in that moment, they're at the right time, they're at the right place, and they're open to what's going on around them. Because there is something really interesting that happens when you get deep in the woods and away from all the noise pollutant and the light pollutants. I mean, that's the reason why I like being where we are, because it's just to see things that God has made and to understand that you're dealing directly with things that God has done and haven't been messed up by human meddling and intervention. So, yeah, I think
That's neat. I'm thinking. So, have you ever seen like spirits unable to cross water?
I haven't seen them necessarily unable, but I have not seen them cross water.
Okay, that's a good distinction. Like it causes issues. That is a concept that goes back to ancient times. It's not in scripture necessarily, but it is a concept that goes back into ancient times where spirits have a hard time crossing. Like it really befuddles them for some reason, and that goes back to that whole boundary thing that you talked about. And like there's mythologies around it. There's like the god of the rivers and water who like stops it, whatever. Even in Lord of the Rings, okay, I have to go there. They're in the beginning of it, these ring wraiths are spirits. They're ghosts. They're these rings that were given to humans that were so powerful, turned them into wraiths, and they're pursuing the hobbits, and the hobbits go across on a ferry, and the spirits can't cross it. and why don't they just go across it? What's the big deal? And one of the questions people have is when the spirits are on their way to go find the hobbits, like it took them a while to get there, and the question is why, and the answer is because there are a lot of rivers in the way, and it actually caused problems for them to get across the river, and it was issues. I mean, there were just issues, and it was a strange concept, but it's just throughout history. I mean, Jesus, when he walks on the water,
Exactly. It's hinted at. The concept is
yeah,
hinted there. Yeah.
he's able to walk on the water because divine beings can, gods can, but ghosts can't, which is why the disciples were stupid for saying, "Oh, it's a ghost."
Exactly.
They weren't stupid because there were no such thing as ghosts. They were stupid because ghosts can't cross water.
Yeah. And a lot of even, and this is going to ruffle some people's feathers, there were a lot of Jewish exorcists at the time of Jesus. I mean, Jesus was not the only one doing this, guys. The only difference is, I've got to say it because I've opened the can of worms, that Jesus didn't do exorcisms. Jesus just cast demons out. Exorcisms have a ritual. There's a rule book. There's a systematic. Jesus just said go. Now,
Right.
A lot of them would put a bowl of water at the doorway, and when they told the spirit to move, if the bowl would ripple, they would know that the spirit had left the room. And so
That's so great. That's great.
Yeah,
well, I want to read a little passage real fast from John 10. I didn't want to get it wrong, so I actually looked it up. We were talking about doorways, about barriers, and he says, Jesus said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep." He says, "I am the door. Anyone who enters by me, he will be saved, and he will go in and go out and find pasture." And of course, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And then he says, "I am the good shepherd. I lay my life for the sheep, not a hired hand. When the wolf comes, the hired hand, the shepherd stays." And so I think the concept was, they had the sheep pen, and then they wouldn't have a gate. He would actually lay down as the gate.
That's that's a fun concept to play with, because it fits in line with what I'm talking about and where we're going with this. And while you were reading that, I was pulling up another scripture in it just so I could reference this for people to go back to. But Genesis 22:17, God tells Abraham, "You'll possess the gates of your enemy." Yeah. So you've got to possess the gates of the land you're in, and that teaching was pivotal for me whenever I was going through my own chaos of dealing with the first time. It had
now the Lord, I'm feeling the Lord move on this, so let's lean into that. You'll possess the gates of your enemy. Who else? Who else does that on a certain mountain? Mountain of Transfiguration. What does Jesus say?
Yes, and the gates of hell shall not prevail. I'm there with you. I'm there with you.
On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell. We act like we're so defensive, like, oh, they're coming to get us. No, the enemy is like, oh, they're coming to get us, because the gates of hell, that barrier, cannot withstand us. Yeah.
Gates are defensive. Gates are not coming to get you. We have to go up against the gates. It was Luther says we've been invited to preach in hell. And this might be our greatest opportunity. I'm sure I butchered that, but I think when we
do a house cleansing, we open the door sometimes with the window, say, "Spirits of the enemy, get out," and we close the door, because this is sealed. We're sealing this for the kingdom, and And I did a house cleansing where it wasn't the water that rippled. Amy opened the door, like we were struggling with this house cleansing. Amy opened the door and said, "Spirits of this house, get out." And there was a palpable wind that we all felt, and a whoosh. Out the door.
It's crazy, because in that moment that it's not just wind. It wasn't just a storm front moved in. It wasn't a
weird thing. And the door opened, no wind, right? There's no temperature, nothing going on. And then it all swished out whenever she commanded it. And interesting stuff, man. None of this is in the book.
No, yeah. So
that's good, because I want this to be a commentary on the book.
Right. Well, and this is where the thought processes, took us with this. And So my experience, what this, the possessing the gates of the land, the possessing the gates of your enemy, this became a huge thing for me, because when little short glimpse into the past, I was married to a very abusive, toxic man, to the point that I was being kept in a house in the foothills of North Carolina with a 6-month-old baby. I was not allowed. The only food I had was what he brought in, which was not enough for a mom with a new baby. My teeth literally went transparent during this time. Yeah,
Wow.
it was bad. And this land is old. I mean, the family bought it in 1790. The houses were built in 1840. There was the main house, the guest house, and the slaves' quarters. It was beautiful land. The country itself was gorgeous.
Mm.
This place was possessed. Okay, I knew things and names of people that, because the demons that lived there, and not just ghosts, but the demons impersonating ghosts, were just everywhere. There was anything on a horror movie, I saw it basically happen in this. And that's when God told me, you need to possess, brought each of these verses, possess the gates of the land you're in. And this place literally had gateposts. And I was a good little Southern Baptist girl. I didn't know what in the world I was doing. I'm like, okay, so I'm going to go out and I'm going to anoint the gatepost with oil. All I've got is a jug of Crisco. So I've got a baby in the backpack, and I'm standing next to this busy highway pouring Crisco on these gateposts. The next 2 weeks, there were 18 different things that happened that caused us to have to leave. And the whole time we were there, he could not talk to me when we were on the property. We could leave the property, we could have a discussion in a restaurant, I got to eat, and then we'd go back home and silence once again.
Wow.
Yeah. And I mean, man, this, for me at that point in time, that was big faith, because I didn't know what I was doing. And I had been given one book, and sorry to say all the books, I had one book that I was reading. And they're like, don't do this alone. I'm like, well, who else am I going to call? I didn't know anyone. And I just, God, if you're here and you really care, you're going to show up for me, even if it's just me. And I was terrified. I have to tell you, I was absolutely terrified. And I don't know what I was terrified of. I mean, it was just some oil on a gatepost. But that was the beginning of this journey that I feel like I'm still on. And matter of fact, Ty and I were sitting on the porch last night, and we were talking about our home and the things we want to do with our home, and how defending it, because right now I have people who show up at my house to take naps. That's why they're here. There's such a peace for them when they get here, that they just curl up, they grab a blanket on the couch, and they're out. And then we'll wake up 30 minutes later and like, I haven't rested that well in years. But that's because this is our home that we're defending, and we're building something here, and hopefully to the glory of God. And we want it to be a place where the kingdom is manifest. And so, to know that this is woven through the scriptures. It's not just an isolated spot, that there is something about these transition points that is kind of spiritually charged. Maybe for lack of a better word, the veil is thinner, that it's a place that is more accessible to more people, because God is doing something symbolically in the physical that parallels what is happening in the spiritual.
Yeah.
So
because it's not the difference for him. I love the idea of, you had land that was tainted, and you have land that is blessed, that is light. And that is part of Israel's story also. We won't get to it tonight, but that is part of Israel's idolatry and sin. So the New Testament word for idolatry is sin, capital S, singular. Israel's idolatry, it's paganism, tainted the land. And I think in Leviticus or Deuteronomy, one of them, God says, if you do the things that the pagans are doing, the land will vomit you out.
Yes.
And it was so bad when the land did vomit them out, the exile, the conquerors, the Assyrians, brought some new people to live there. And it was so bad spiritually that the Assyrian leaders said, we need to find some prophets of Yahweh, because we're doing something wrong here. This land is messed up.
Was it the lion that kept attacking them and killing? Yeah.
Yeah,
Because
I mean, this is not just biblical worldview. This is ancient worldview. And the Syrians, awful. And the Syrians are awful. They're barbarians, but they're like, we know what's up.
Yeah.
We know what's up. This land is infested with the demonic. They wouldn't say it like that. So they brought priests to try to, and that's where the Samaritans came from, incidentally.
Exactly. Yeah. Which, interestingly enough, I did an episode on Two Trees podcast with John Dillon. Yeah. He talked about the Samaritan woman. Her story is a continuation of Hannah. And so, because the Samaritans split off, or they claim to have split off, there's debate at that same time of Hannah. But yeah,
I love it that we did not plan that, but how it's so beautiful.
Yeah. So, but no, the great thing, and this is what I okay, I almost lost it. Where is it? I do this when things start clicking, because there is definite consequence to the environment when sin occurs. And I think this is a concept Christians have lost. And this is so important. And if we can get our around this one fact, we've bought into that lie. My sin is personal, me and God, we're going to deal with it, just the two of us. I don't need any outside voices because I'm not hurting anyone else. It's a victimless crime. Okay.
Right. Like what you're doing in your home, on your phone or your computer. Who cares?
Yeah. And it's crap. It's a lie. It's straight from Satan's mouth, because God says, yes, the land will vomit them out. The earth groans for her redemption. It's right there in Scripture. Sin literally damages the earth. That's the second story in the creative account. When Adam and Eve sin, what does God curse? Not Adam, not Eve. He says the ground will be because of you, and it's going to bring forth thistles and thorns. And if we would understand that sin impacts the environment, it impacts the ground we're standing on, the air we're breathing, and everyone else who comes in contact with that, maybe we'd be a little bit more careful about what we do.
Yeah. When the Watchers came to Mount Hermon, it so tainted. So the sons of God, the spiritual powers, they came to Mount Hermon to do the thing with the women. It so tainted that mountain. It was known. I mean, it was like Mount Doom.
Yep.
I mean, it was known as.
Sure.
Say it again.
To every culture, not just the Israelites. Like every culture believed this was the point where you entered into hell.
Right. The gates of hell are right there. And in Jesus' time, there were all sorts of temples to pagan gods. It was just. But there's a psalm that says Mount Hermon is redeemed. I didn't say it like that, but like Mount Hermon celebrates and worships Yahweh. And sometimes people who are skeptics about some of this are like, well, if Mount Hermon is so bad, why did you say that? Because God wants to redeem the earth, including the gates of hell.
Yes. Absolutely.
Like he wants to restore Mount Hermon. He wants Mount Hermon not to be known as a place where the Watchers came and tainted the land, but as a beautiful garden.
It's his creation. People forget that. It's God's creation. Why wouldn't he want it back? Mm-hmm. Even though people may have resided there for a period of time, they still do. I don't know all the way that works out, but still God's. He wants it back. And if he wants a mountain back, how much more does he want each of us back? And we need to bear in mind, if he wants to redeem the earth, my goodness gracious, he wants to redeem you. And so
but he wants you to he wants to redeem you first and then go and take the land.
Yes.
Like Caleb, when they came in, finally Caleb had to wait 40 years to take his mountain.
Yes.
Okay, so like the two like he had to wait, like of the 12 spies that went into Israel, and 10 of them like, oh, there be giants here, and Caleb's like, yeah, whatever, Yahweh's with us. But they had to wait 40 years. So, poor Caleb's an old man. He's like, that's my mountain. I think he had a daughter he was fighting for, too. Yeah. That's my mountain. Yeah. And he took it because he's like, I'm redeeming that place. That place was full of giants until I get there.
Yeah. Yeah. And he still went after it. Even in his old age, he still went after it, because that's the other lie. Unless you're young and got all this energy, you're not going to be. I mean, even last night, my husband's getting ready to turn 60. He is my grumpy old man. And so he's talking about his age and the things that aren't going to happen in his lifetime. I'm like, yeah, but look at the biblical stories. How old was Moses? How old was Abraham? How old was you? And so, and now Caleb, this is a great example. He still fought the fight. And so being old doesn't give you an excuse to give up. And
Moses was 80. He thought he missed it. Let's just be honest. He's on the mountain. I missed it. I had a chance 40 years ago. I completely blew it. I acted out of my own passions, and I missed it. His best days were ahead.
Yeah.
At
Yeah.
80.
And I love all of this, because when we realize that the God we serve is not limited by, the things that may have inhabited our lives, like the angels, the watchers at Hermon, our lives are not ruined by the choices we've made or missed opportunities. God will redeem. We just have to get out of his way. We've got to present it to him. And I think this is one of the reasons why going back to that story, going back and telling our stories, being willing to share what we've experienced, is another way we invite people in to see the world through our eyes and to see how God has worked on our behalf, and encourage people. I promise you 90% of what I do, because people say, oh, I just love talking to you, I think it's great. And I'm not trying to brag, because all I'm doing, seriously, this is all I'm doing. You're not alone. You're not the only one. I understand. And that is basically what most of the time I'm doing with people.
You're letting them tell their story, and then they're scared because they haven't been able to tell their story.
Mm-hmm.
And then you said you're not alone, and then you tell stories.
Yeah.
Because and the stories are all true.
But every good friend I have ever had, basically within a few minutes of meeting, one of us looks over at the other and sees these metaphorical scars on the other one's arm, and we roll up our sleeve and go, got one just like it. As soon as you show that scar, oh, I've got one just like it. Now you're linked. Now you're hooked. And I think that's why the perfect God had to have scars. Because you ever think about that? Jesus didn't have to come back with the scars. But he chose to. Because that's the place where humanity can go, oh, I've got a scar that looks like that. I was wounded in a similar way. And Jesus can say, yeah, me too. I've got a scar that looks like yours. And so that's where we can connect to a perfect God.
How painful. How many people have been betrayed by a friend? Mm-hmm. And he was betrayed by one of his closest friends. He saw it coming, didn't give up on him.
Man, I have watched The Passion of the Christ one time, and I watched the entire movie, and I kind of sat back and let it kind of roll over me. And I'm not the kind of person who gets emotional at movies, but that scene, it hit me when he's in the garden and he accepts the kiss. And it's like, can you imagine what kind of fortitude it took to know what's on the other side of that kiss, to not flinch away? Mm-hmm. That was the scene that just killed me. I mean, not the crucifixion, not the beating, that scene right there. And I think about that. How often does he accept the kiss for me? Oh God, I'm going to do better. Oh, I'm never going to do that again. I promise I'm going to love the stupid idiot woman at Walmart that drives me crazy. And he accepts the kiss.
Yeah.
And I still mess up. And the beautiful thing is, the minute I repent, the minute I go down, hey, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that. We're good. We're good. And I think too many of us have been painted this picture of God who is just waiting to zap us. He's not the God of Israel, the God of creation. He's Zeus with the thunderbolts. Mm-hmm. And that's not who our God is. So we got like way, way far afield tonight.
This is beautiful. A beautiful conversation. We didn't even get to creation.
I know.
Obviously, we got a lot all over the place in the story of Israel. But yeah, sometimes seers see chaos. They see it.
Yeah.
They see it. They see spiritual manifestations. They're not demons. They're not spiritual powers. Mm-hmm. It's chaos. And that informs how we should pray about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That was actually one of my notes that I'd made, was every time we put a huge label on something, And we see this power, this supernatural event, and we decide, oh, well, that's got to be Leviathan, or ooh, that's got to be Lilith, is another popular one, or ooh, that's got to be Beelzebub. We're probably overinflating what we're dealing with. We're probably exaggerating what we're dealing with, and don't try to reach out, and don't try to define things. Let the Lord show you what you need to know. Because He's so faithful to give you exactly what you need to know in the moment. And I think so often we want those easy answers, and that's not what this is about. It's about being
it's about a story.
Mhm.
It's about a story.
Yeah. At every good story, where does the conflict come in? When the communication breaks down. I mean,
Yeah.
all of your dramas, all of your action movies. This is Nathan swears this is why every movie's post-apocalyptic when it comes to drama. It's all about when communication breaks down. So you don't want that kind of drama. Keep your communication lines clear.
Especially with the guy who sees all of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Or I should say the God who sees all of it. Yeah. Well, let's wrap it up here, and we'll come back to this this next time, because I feel like we're at that transition period where a bunch of waits when we get across that border.
This is true. I think you're right.
So we'll just pause there.
Thank you for listening to the Seers See podcast. Opening and closing music is Sun by Jason Callahan. Bumper music includes Just Around the World and Alta Heron by Keela Camps. Music and Seers See podcast are distributed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0.